Yeah, we've been really slow when it comes to the issue of drones, drone capability, and as you say, missile defence. So we'll keep an eye on all that and keep the pressure on. But I want to get your thoughts also on Ukraine, as you just mentioned. Been some incredible responses, attacks by Ukraine utilising drone technology just in the last week, taking out Russian bombers, and then some underwater explosives that overnight have attacked that crucial bridge in Crimea again. Ukraine seems to be having some military success from what seems like a weak position.
Yes, well, they're not that weak. I mean, they have a remarkable capacity to build military equipment. Remember, during the period that Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, many of the military factories were actually in Ukraine that supplied the Soviet Union. So the other thing is the Europeans and the Americans are now starting to give still more support to Ukraine, in particular providing them with longer range missiles, lifting the restrictions that President Biden imposed on missile range. And so what's the big picture here? The big picture is if President Trump and the Europeans want a ceasefire, and that's a good ambition to have, then they have to convince the Russians that the Russians can never win. Yeah. I mean, that would be, if I were the President of the United States, that would be my message to President Putin. Look, mate, you can never win this war, and I'm going to make sure you never can. So let's have a ceasefire.
Now, you wrote about this really perceptively in The Australian earlier this week. You said Donald Trump needs to study up on his history. If he's not reading, someone needs to brief him on it. And it's this idea of peace through strength and making sure he understands just how expansionist Russia is.
Yeah, and the other thing is understanding, it goes back to the debate we've been having about defence here in Australia. Understand the linkages between the wars that are happening in Europe and in the Middle East, the role of Iran, the relationship between Iran and Russia, and of course the ATM for Iran and Russia, that's China.
Yep.
And the risks of these three working together, which they are doing, to undermine the West. And the worst thing that could happen would be a war between the United States and its allies and China over Taiwan. But if China is convinced that the West, particularly the Americans, are robust and will not yield in Ukraine, and that they will force Iran to do a non-nuclear deal, then that will discourage the Chinese from embarking on an adventure to try and take Taiwan.
Yeah, it's all connected and it's all worrying just at this particular moment. Thanks for joining us, Alexander.